If you could talk to Donald Trump for a day, what would you try to say or convince him about? I don't think I would try to convince him about things. I don't actually try to convince people about things, I don't think. I try to ask them, I'd ask him a whole bunch of questions. I'd try to figure out how he thought, because I'm really curious about that. I'd ask him all sorts of questions. See if I could find out what he was up to. I'd like to know what he's aiming at. I'd like to know why he became president, what he did right, what he did wrong, what he dreads, like what he would consider a catastrophic failure, where he thinks his biggest weaknesses are, what he'd like to leave as a legacy. That would be fascinating. But see, I find, generally speaking, it's much more interesting to ask people questions, especially people like that, than ever to try to convince them of things. Because the thing is, I already know what I know, but I have no idea what he knows or what he's like. And so it'd be amazing to be able to talk to him. And so I have a bit of that opportunity now in Canada, because I've been speaking to a lot of political figures in Canada. I'm going to have that opportunity in Europe. But a lot of what you want to do when you meet people is ask them questions, because they'll tell you all sorts of things you don't know. And that's also an entry point to a really good conversation, is to ask questions. So that's what I would do. I'd ask questions like mad until he chased me away. So
the worst thing from my point of view that he does is make it seem okay to be a troll, and to be a troll in real life, and to use the kind of language that he uses. And
I think that might be the worst thing that he does. It's possible that that's the worst thing that he does. The Trump phenomenon probably worries me less than people think it should. But there are reasons for that. The first reason is that I don't really think that the American people are more polarized now than they were 10 years ago. And the reason I think that is because for 20 years, 50% of them have voted for Republicans, 50% of them have voted for Democrats. It hasn't moved. It's been exactly the same. Now, this time they had Clinton and Trump as candidates, and perhaps that was unfortunate. And I also don't think Trump won the election. I think Clinton lost the election. It was hers. She had it in the bag. There were a number of things she did that were really not very bright, like play identity politics, that cost her the election. I don't think that the Americans are any more polarized than they were under Nixon. And then that was pretty polarized. Like, there was violence on the campuses. There was more violence in that period of time than there is now, and more polarization. Of course, the war in Vietnam was still going on. I don't think that it's obvious that the Americans are more polarized than they were under Reagan. Maybe they are, but I don't think it's worse than under Nixon. And so they've muddled through this sort of thing before. Trump is an anomaly, in my estimation. He isn't a typical Republican. He's quite bombastic and assertive. He's not a typical conservative. In fact, he wasn't a conservative, I don't think, at all before.
He's a registered Democrat,
well,
I think.
Yeah, and he's got an entrepreneurial bent as well. And entrepreneurial types tend to be liberal,
that's what he sold himself on, I suppose, as president.
Well, he is an entrepreneur. He's an author. He had a successful TV show. He's had his real estate dealings. And you can quibble about how successful he was at some of those things. He was certainly successful on TV. And so he's got an entrepreneurial temperament. So he's a strange person. He's an idiosyncratic person. And the one thing I would say in his favor, as far as I'm concerned so far, is that he has not embroiled the U.S. in an additional stupid war. And that's happened a lot in the last 15 years. And the fact that that hasn't happened so far, I'm quite happy about. So he's noisy. He's provocative, that's for sure. He seems impulsive, although it's hard to tell how much of that is crafted, He's definitely disagreeable, which is quite interesting, and that comes out in his Twitter behavior and so forth, and in the way that he handles his political allies, for that matter. He's certainly not currying favor, and you can make the case that he's a divisive figure, and perhaps that's the case. But
at least on a global scale. From the outside looking in. I'm not. You're traveling through America. I'm not.
America's very more upset than I've seen it. People are more upset in the United States than I've seen. Certainly, I lived there for 6 years in the 90s. People are more upset now than they were then. The tension is palpable. but I'm not convinced that that reflects a genuine polarization on the part of the populace itself. There's lots of factors at play. What I'm hoping for is a return to normative incompetence among politicians. That would be really nice. Moderate left, moderate right, reasonable discussion, certain underlay of ineradicable corruption, you know, small-scale corruption that you always see in political systems, but none of this ideological excess. That would be lovely.
Reasonable discussion, I think, is the
What would you say Trump's IQ really is? Does 160 seem reasonable?
No.
This will be quoted in...
No, 160 is really, really high.
Yeah.
I mean, the typical... The smart person that you're likely to meet in your life has an IQ of around 145.
Yeah.
160 is getting pretty damn rare. And Trump's old, and IQ goes down with age, fluid IQ, although crystallized IQ either stays the same or goes up slightly. So he isn't the problem solver or the learner that he was when he was 20. No one is. If you're in good physical shape, that helps a lot. His IQ is clearly well above average. I don't know, and he's done complex things in his life, and a lot of them. And that indicates that there's something to him, you know, and he hasn't been successful just in one domain. He's been successful in multiple complex domains, each of which were quite difficult. It's very difficult to be a reality TV star that's successful, right? It's very difficult to work in the construction business, and especially on large projects. And I know he's had his economic ups and downs, but he stayed in the game for a long time, very stressful. He's very stress resistant. So he's no dummy. And I mean, it's nice to always think that your political opponent is just stupid, but he's done too many complex things for me to assume that he's somehow, if he wasn't smart, he couldn't have done those things.
Yeah, I'm glad you're acknowledging that, because when I see the people that are in hysteric mode and just saying he's this evil nutbag who doesn't know what he's doing and all this stuff, it just seems like such a lazy way of thinking about it. You don't have to like any of the things. You may not like the way he speaks or any of that, but the idea that somehow this is a dumb person, I think, is discounting of just the way humans have to work. This is interesting from Super Chat. Do you have any...
Well, he also won the presidency.
Right.
With a completely original campaign. And it's like, and without spending much money. It's like, okay, is he lucky? Because is that what you're saying? It's just lucky.
Right.
Well, I don't think it was just luck. It was at least maybe, well, it looked at least to some degree like courage. Maybe it was just blind throwing caution to the wind. You know, I don't know if he ever expected that he could possibly win.
Yeah, and as I'm sure you'd argue, it probably had a little something to do with all those things, that maybe there was some courage, but that he also surrounded himself with people who maybe understood politics more than he did.
Well, he could obviously, he can also obviously read a crowd.
Yeah.
Because he was appealing to crowds. And that was partly because he did, I think, try to say what he thought. Now, you could criticize what he thought, and that's fine, but he also didn't prepare the same speech. You know, he didn't prepare a speech and then deliver the same one everywhere, which I think is, I really find that rather reprehensible for people to do that.
Yeah.
Because they're parroting themselves, or someone else writes their speeches, which is something I can't even imagine.
I can't.